Hey, welcome to Bryce. This is Bryce, and what's really cool about Bryce is that we get to create a three-dimensional looking world. Now, this is the Bryce interface up here in the left-hand corner. We're going to be doing a lot of our work in this upper left-hand corner. So let's get a little bit familiar with it. This little preview window is called the Nano Preview window. It's called Nano because it's so tiny, and if you look, there's a lot of teeny tiny little icons all over the place in Bryce. Everything is very tiny. Directly below the Nano Preview window, we see a representation of our world, and if you click it, it changes the different views. So what you want to do is go to this little tiny triangle, go to View Options, and then you can click whatever view you want and get it very specifically and very quickly. I like Director's View because that's the view that you're actually going to be doing your image in. These three icons right here have to do with uh, moving your camera around your landscape. We're not going to be doing anything with that right now, maybe later on. Over here, these two small minuscule little balls also have to do with camera tracking and how it turns and pans the field of view. The large ball is a tracking ball again for the camera. Right here, the big green ball. This is what you're going to be using a lot. This is called the render ball or the render button. Render is just a fancy way of saying drawing, and what the program does is it takes all of your information that you put into the computer and then it renders it out. It draws it. So when you click it, you get to see an image. And as you can see, this is really pretty basic. This is what you start off with. A very basic generic sky and kind of a gray sort of nondescript type of flat ground. Notice down here we see 85% previewing. This is just a preview window that we're looking at right now. This is not the true image. Look at the word anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing is a word that pretty much means taking out the jagged edges. It's refining the drawing and making it smoother and more realistic looking. Okay, so I'm going to go to the big ball and I'm going to stop by clicking on the blue render ball. It's blue when it's rendering and green when it's not. So this is your basic default screen. We come to the top and we see we have three words: create, edit, sky, and fog. Under create we see three different planes. A plane is a flat surface. We have the cloud plane, looks like clouds. We're not going to be using that because that's a little bit more advanced feature than our first project, so we'll be doing that later on. Over here we have the ground, just as a flat ground. Next to that we have water, and to the right of the ground plane we have terrains. Terrain is another word for ground, and since this is a mountain, this is going to give us bumpy or rough or mountainous terrain. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to edit, back to create, so that we have our wireframe image to work with. Okay, before we get started, notice that there's a gray grid down here. This is the surface on top of which we're making our world. This green line going across horizontally is our horizon, and then these other little lines that you see have to do with your image fitting inside the picture frame of the imaginary camera. Okay, so I'm going to click on terrain and make a mountain. Now this mountain right now, if we look in our Nano Preview window, it's pretty nondescript, and if we look at the wire mesh, which is this red bumpy stuff, it's called a wireframe image or a mesh, and we can see that it has sharp edges and it looks pretty fake. Okay, now it also has all these little tiny buttons, these little tiny handles all over it, and when you put your cursor over them, the cursor changes. when you work with Bryce, you're working with a three-dimensional graph. Now, some of you have already had graphing and you know what an x-axis is and a y-axis. Okay, so the y is going to make it taller because the y goes up and down, right? And x, let's try to find an x. X goes side to side. But one that you don't know about is z. Z is the space that comes forward towards you. Is that Z? It is Z. It comes forward and goes back. Okay, so we have Y, X, and Z. Okay. The last kind of handle that we have is the one that you're going to be using mostly, and that is the true handle for the entire form. When I put my cursor over that particular dot, the icon changes from a dot to a square within a square. That tells you that you have a handle that's going to not be on the X, Y, or Z axis, but is actually going to make your image grow. So I want my image to grow because I'm making a mountain. So look at the little arrows. They go side to side, and that's how you pull your mouse from side to side. Now, if I was to just leave this as it is, okay, if you look down here really faint, we see kind of a really light red grid. That grid down there is telling me, because I've had some experience working with this program, is telling me that there's a shadow down there. This mountain is not planted in the ground. So let's go to the render ball and see what I mean. This mountain is going to be flying in the air and look very fake. Now, the objective of computer generated imaging, when you're doing something that is supposed to look realistic, it needs to look realistic. If it looks fake, you've done a very poor job at your computer generated imaging. The reason why the movie Avatar was so successful was because it was believable. We know that there are no 10-foot tall blue aliens on some planet or moon called Pandora. We know that there's no such a thing, but because the CGI was so good, it was convincing to people, and you take it in as if it was a true reality. You don't question it. Okay, if we look at this, I stopped the rendering. If we look at this, we see that we see the sharp edge of the mountainous plain, and we see the shadow underneath it. So that is not good CGI. So I'm going back to edit, and I'm going to grab anywhere inside that mountain that is not a handle, and I'm going to take it and plant it down. And notice that the sharp edge has disappeared. We still have this grid down here for our default ground. And I'm rendering to show you the difference. And this is just a preview render. What I've done is I've clicked the little tiny ball next to the big one, and that gives you a faster render just for previewing. Okay, look at how random the bottom of this mountain is now. It's all craggy, and it looks like how the bottom of a mountain might actually look. So we're going to stop the rendering, go back to create.